What's going on, everybody? It's been a long time. Sorry for the missing time again, but here I am, back in your life, back in my life as well. Intelligent Thoughts, episode 50. We're going to be breaking down UFC Fight Night 133. That's the one here in Boise, Idaho this weekend. Tomorrow, actually, heavyweight bout. It's going to be headlined by Junior Dos Santos versus Blagoy Ivanov. All right, everybody. I'm happy to be back. Again, was planning on doing a podcast for last week's UFC 226. The big one there was the Daniel Cormier getting the victory over Stipe Miocic in one of the biggest fights in UFC history. The light heavyweight championship and the heavyweight championship being champions, I guess, fighting each other. Obviously, I'm sure everybody knows by now, Cormier with a knockout, looking fantastic. He's now the light heavyweight and the heavyweight champion of the UFC. Congratulations to Daniel Cormier. Fantastic performance. Interesting to see that he had the power. He's still pretty strong. Remember, what he did to Josh Barnett at heavyweight, and he was undefeated at heavyweight, still is undefeated at heavyweight. A shitload of power, though, honestly, from Daniel Cormier. Overeem wasn't able to knock him out, and Ngannou wasn't able to knock out Stipe. Cormier, the undersized, with the dad bod, the daddest man in the world, comes through with a sweet sort of a right hook, right overhand hook knockout, and was pretty awesome there. Unfortunately, we didn't get to see Max Holloway fight. He had some concussion-like symptoms, maybe because of the weight cut, or maybe because of something that happened in practice. I think they're saying because of the weight cut, but I guess it probably could be whatever. So the Holloway-Ortega fight was off. Otherwise, it was a pretty good card. I'm sure everybody really enjoyed it. The big card, the 4th of July card, is usually the UFC's biggest card of the year. And I'm sure, I haven't really looked at the pay-per-view numbers, but I'm sure that it probably, I'm sure it probably was the case this year as well. With no further ado, let's get into this week's card. Obviously, it's a big one for me, being from Boise. This is going to be the first time that UFC is ever in Boise. Hopefully it does well. They brought former champion Junior Dos Santos and former World Series of Fighting champion, and I think PFL champion as well, Blagoy Ivanov. It's a good headliner. Not the greatest of all time, but it should be a pretty awesome fight. Ivanov could certainly, make a statement or make a name for himself in the UFC with a win over JDS. JDS's last fight was for the championship, so he's actually not terribly far removed from any of that. It was over a year ago, but it's actually a pretty decent nod to Boise, and I know a few people that are going, and I'm sure that they appreciate that. Let's break it down. First fight, main event of the evening. We're going to have number 7, Junior Dos Santos, like I said, taking on UFC newcomer Blagoy Ivanov. Like I just said, Dos Santos' last fight was about a year ago, last May. And he fought Stipe, obviously got knocked out in the first round. Before that, he's kind of just back and forth, it's been about one fight every year for him. He beat Rothwell by decision in 2016, got knocked out by Overeem in 2015, 2014. He actually beat Miocic just 4 fights ago, 4 fights removed from him actually beating Stipe in a fight of the night back in 2014. That's pretty interesting, considering Stipe actually has the longest run for a heavyweight champion of all time. I think it was, 4 title defenses or something like that, or maybe 3 title defenses. But yeah, Stipe is the longest running heavyweight champion of all time. Longer than Kane even, or which was somewhat surprising, considering how dominant Kane seemed. As far as Ivanov, the story is pretty much just the opposite. He has 1 loss in his career. He's standing at 16-1, 6 knockouts, 6 submissions. His only loss is to, I believe, Alexander Volkov, who is now pretty high up in the UFC rankings here as well at heavyweight. A giant. Volkov's a pretty interesting fighter to watch. But Ivanov has defended his championship over in the World Series of Fighting multiple times, and including his last fight, I guess, was for the PFL here against Kyle Elankar. Decisionated him. That was just, 11-17, so about 7 months ago, 8 months ago. before that, he fought again in March of last year, and that was back with the World Series of Fighting. Defended that championship against Sean Jordan, ex-UFC fighter. I'm sure we all remember him. Beat Josh Copeland about a year before that. A little more active than JDS, but not terribly active for him as well. But he, again, defended quite a bit of, or at least fought at a championship level for quite a long time. Obviously not the level of the UFC, but pretty close. I mean, the World Series of Fighting fighters seem to do pretty well. I feel like Justin Gaethje did pretty well. But yeah, Ivanov coming over here as a plus 140 underdog, actually. JDS is going to be a minus 170 favorite. I don't know if that's because of the name. Honestly, I think that Ivanov has less to prove in this fight right now. I mean, JDS, it's been a year removed since he'd been knocked out. He hasn't been, where is JDS at this point? He's 34 years old. Ivanov 31, closer to the prime of his career. JDS isn't getting any younger. Obviously, he's been, knocked out a few times. What JDS are we going to see right here? And I'm not sure about his contract situation, what it looks like with the UFC, but obviously that's going to come into play here as well. He needs this win pretty bad. Ivanov, with the win, it would be a good thing for him. Obviously he needs it, but I actually think he could take a setback like this a little better than JDS could at this point. Let's see here. JDS standing at 18-5, 12 knockouts. We all know his game. Basically going to try to box the lights out on Blagoy. Whether or not that happens is going to be a different story. Blagoy, 5'11". So we're looking at a 5-inch height advantage or disadvantage, however you really want to get into it, for JDS. Now, Blagoy being a better wrestler, he has a combat sambo background. He has a gold medal in combat sambo. He's a black belt in judo. He probably feels, I would imagine, that him being shorter is actually is better, gives him better leverage as far as any sort of takedown or grappling might be concerned. Obviously, for JDS, he probably is happy to be 5 inches taller because he's looking to do some boxing, probably keep him to the outside. And try to land some bombs. JDS has been one of the better pure boxers in at least the heavyweight division in the UFC, of all time, really. I mean, that's kind of his background, was always boxing. That's how he knocked out Cain Velasquez to win his championship. He's a black belt in jiu-jitsu, but he doesn't necessarily seem to be wouldn't necessarily be like a major threat, or it's not like a major part of his game. I don't think he wants to engage in a grappling match with Ivanov. I think that Ivanov is probably at least on a similar level as JDS. He's also strong as shit. He's got the chubby man body that always seems to work. So we're looking at a 5-round fight here. I like Ivanov, honestly. I think probably a decision or a TKO. I'll give him a TKO, maybe like a second-round TKO for Ivanov. They're both probably going to land good punches, but I think that we're going to see just Ivanov be able to close the distance, take JDS to the ground, probably do some ground and pound, put a beating on him, and then come the second round or something like that, JDS might slow down a little bit. Maybe Ivanov catches him. Maybe the other way around. But if I have to pick anybody, I'm taking Ivanov, and that plus 140 seems pretty goddamn nice for the heavyweight main event of the evening. All right, moving on. Don't know if this is the co-main event or just the next fight on the card. Wasn't really clear when I was looking it up. We got a featherweight bout. Another West Coast, kind of a West Coast fighter everybody knows about. We got Dennis Bermudez fighting Rick Glenn. Neither of them ranked in the featherweight rankings right now. It's too deep. Unfortunately for Bermudez, he's coming off 3 straight losses. All of them, luckily, have been in about a year span, so I mean that's a little bit better than maybe the one fight a year that JDS is doing or something like that. But yeah, earlier this year, split decision loss to Andre Fili. A little bit controversial. I thought Fili won that one though. Last July he lost to Elkins, Darren Elkins in a split decision. Again, I probably liked Elkins in that fight, but good fight. And then just a few months before that, he got KO'd by the Korean Zombie. So his last win is actually in, August of 2016. So we're almost 2 years removed from Dennis Bermudez's last win at 31 years old. Not terribly old, but he does seem like he is has more fight wear and fight tear than that age shows. On the other side, Rick Glenn, coming off of a decision loss to Miles Jury back in December. Other than that, he had been on a few fight win streak, beating Gavin Tucker a couple months before that last year, and then in February of last year, beat Philippe Nove. So 3 fights last year. This is going to be the first fight for Rick Glenn this year. He is saying, 20 wins, 5 losses, 1 draw, 11 KOs on the career, standing at 6 feet tall with a 70-inch reach. So he's going to have a 6-inch reach advantage on Dennis Bermudez, a 6-inch height advantage, 4-inch reach advantage on Dennis Bermudez. 29-year-old, basically, the same. Probably not quite as much wear and tear on Rick Glenn as there is on Dennis. So the game plan, it's obviously for Dennis Bermudez, he's going to want to grind. He's a Division I wrestler. Obviously, that's basically what he makes his claim on. Clinch, ground and pound, and then just dirty boxing and things like that. He's going to want to get on the inside. Like I said, he's going to be a lot shorter than Rick Glenn. Rick Glenn is fighting out of the Rufus Sport Camp in Milwaukee, so he is probably going to have a much probably a very good game plan as far as how to deal with this fight. Brown belt in jiu-jitsu. I wouldn't give him the advantage over Bermudez as far as grappling is concerned. He's good. He has submission skills, but Bermudez is, very tough as far as wrestling is concerned. He has some submission skills too, mainly coming from a wrestling style, top mount and things like that. But, he's no joke. Dennis Bermudez is no joke on the ground. So I do give him the advantage over Rick Glenn in that situation. All right, let's look at the odds makers here and what they think about this. They have Dennis Bermudez as a minus 235, a pretty big favorite on that one. Rick Glenn plus 185. Bermudez has definitely been higher. He has so far has a better career if they were to both retire right now. I kind of like Rick Glenn, honestly. Yeah, I kind of like Rick Glenn. I think it's going to be a decent striking affair for him. I see it maybe like a 29-28 decision. Probably not a knockout for either of them. If any of them's going to knock the other one out, it would probably be Bermudez knocking out Glenn. But either way, I see this fight probably going the distance. Probably a good close fight. I actually am pretty surprised to see that the Las Vegas has the odds so heavily in the favor of Dennis Bermudez. It could be name factor again, like I was just saying with the last fight. Rick Glenn, not nearly the name that Dennis Bermudez is as far as the UFC is concerned, so that could be a lot of it. But if I have to pick, I'm going to go with Rick Glenn by a decision, close, possibly a split decision. But that's going to be a pretty awesome fight to watch. All right, we're moving on to the welterweight division. This is actually a somewhat exciting one, I think. At least brings a little bit of star power somewhat to CenturyLink Arena this weekend. Sage Northcutt going to be making his welterweight debut up from lightweight. It's going to be taking on Zach Otto. We've all seen quite a bit of Sage Northcutt, at this point in his life. He's only 22 years old, and we all know him quite well. She had been in the UFC, 3 years, 4 years, something like that. Obviously, he got submitted by Mickey Gall 2 years ago, or about a year and a half ago, in what was somewhat of an embarrassing point after he got called out by Mickey Gall after the CM Punk fight. Since then, though, pretty well, looked pretty good, back-to-back wins. The first of which came in November of last year against Michael Quinones. Just a decision win, but he looked pretty good doing so. And then just 3 months later, earlier this year in February, another decision win over T-Ball Guzzi. Looking pretty good. Now he's up at welterweight. Looks ripped. I just saw a picture of him on the internet. His fucking bicep is one of the most ridiculous biceps by far the most ridiculous bicep I've ever seen for an MMA fighter or like a UFC fighter. But it's borderline, it's borderline like bodybuilder ridiculous. Like the shape of it is fucking strange. I'm sure you guys can probably find that. It's all over any MMA news right now. But yeah, he says he feels good up at 170. It makes a lot of sense to me.